Next, order number 5 is discussion and consideration of amending City of Edmond ward boundaries based upon the 2020 Federal Census data. We have a presentation for this one. Mr. Moore, or are you going to start us off?
Mayor, Council, this is every 10 years. We start this process all over again, and I think before Casey makes a statement, I think the city attorney has a short statement he wants to convey to the council.
The state statute specifies the process we are to follow with regard to the look at our awards every 10 years, or approximately every 10 years as soon as we receive the census data. One of the important things to consider as we look at those is to make sure that we don't split precincts as established by the county election board. So we've been monitoring and working with the county election board to see what things, see how they were moving through their process. And so we're now ready, as we looked at the census data, and to do the very best that we can to make the wards themselves equal as practical as can be, and also without having to split the precincts. And so I think Casey has a presentation for you, but we're complying with the state law. And then following our discussion tonight in direction to staff, we'll be preparing the actual ordinance, which will identify the actual boundaries of the specific wards. And we'll do a publication and notice period for that. So you'll be looking at seeing the actual ordinance at your July 25th meeting. So.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Mr. Moore.
All right,
Yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you for letting me talk about this. We've been working on stuff related to the census for a very long time. As everyone's probably well aware, the census took much longer to process through than it typically does. So usually as a city, we would probably be here in this spot a year prior to where we are now. But that's how it all worked out nationally this year. And so we now have all the data that we need and all the approvals that we need to go ahead and move forward and do what we need to do. So we've got a brief presentation, a couple of options for you all to consider, and then you all can decide where you want to go from there. So we'll jump in. Mr. Murrock may have touched on some of this. So ward redistricting overview. This is based upon data received for Edmond from the 2020 Federal Census. Before local changes can be enacted, any changes to federal, state, and county boundaries must be finalized. And so that's all happened. In fact, the county just finalized theirs in April, which allowed us to start our work. So that was the last one that needed to move forward. Our official population, and this will be our official 2020 population until 2030, 94,608. So that was the official number that we received. Now, obviously, we're in 2022 now, so that number may even be different. But what we have to understand is for this exercise, it's based upon this 2020 census. So with 4 wards, the target population for each ward is 23,607. So trying to get as close to that as we can without splitting precincts or moving a council member out of a precinct, or out of a ward, I'm sorry. County precincts cannot be subdivided. Each current council member must live in the ward he or she represents. Historically here in the city, what we've done is made minimal changes to keep wards close to their current form. One thing that's very important to consider, and we say this every 10 years, socioeconomic conditions, numbers of apartments or single-family homes are not considered when redrawing these boundaries. So again, we have kind of our starting place, and what we try to do is get to that number as close as possible by moving as little as possible. And so that's what we've done here. So we'll go through a little bit of a history. You'll kind of see what our wards have looked like over the past few decades. They really haven't changed much, and then you'll see what options we have to work with this time. So this is the map from 1990 to 2000, and so if you look at it, it really doesn't look a lot different than what we have now. Ward 1 essentially fits that middle part, goes a little further north than it does now. Ward 4 is very similar. Ward 3 is a little bit smaller, and Ward 2 has always been very big because of the rural nature of that area. We know that that's changing, and obviously we anticipate that will probably change quite a bit for the 2030 census, and so we may be seeing much larger changes when that census rolls around. 2000-2010, so you saw Ward 1 shrunk and really now became kind of the center of Edmond as Ward 2 expanded up to the north. And again, these changes were all necessary to try to get as close to even population numbers as possible. 2010 to now, so what you see here, Ward 1 shrunk even more. Ward 2 got a little bit bigger. Ward 4 got bigger. And Ward 3 got a little bit bigger. And the reason Ward 1 was shrinking, because it's more densely populated. The other area is not quite as densely populated. But as things continue to develop, you start to see Ward 1's going to end up growing again, and we're going to, over time, see a little bit more balance. So these are the numbers that we got from the census. So if you take the numbers inside of each of these wards, you can see we said what we're trying to get to as a target population, 23,607. Sorry, I'm pointing with my fingers and I don't go really well. Yeah, there we go, 23,607. So as you can see here with that, Ward 1 is pretty light on population. Ward 2, pretty heavy on population. Ward 3 is a little bit light. Ward 4 is a little bit heavy. So what we know is if we're going to try to move as little as possible, then that's what we're going to do to try to even these things out. These red dots, these are the residences of the current sitting council. So again, things that have to be considered if we're going to make changes, especially if someone's close to a boundary. Ward 2, that's not an issue necessarily. Ward 1, down here, we got to be careful. Ward 4 for sure, because these precincts are pretty large up in here. That limits us from making changes here. And Ward 3, really not much of an issue there either. So we got a couple of options to look at. First things first. So for the 2020s, this is option number 1. And essentially what we've done is we've taken this line that ran right here. I'll go back and show you. See that line right there? That line moves over. So basically you move 2 square miles of population from Ward 1 to Ward 2. What does that do? Well, that puts Ward 1 essentially right on in population, puts Ward 2 almost right on in population. No changes to 4 and 3. Again, because we don't have a lot of flexibility because we can't split the precincts. We have one option then if we're gonna talk about what do we do with 4 and 3, can we get them a little bit closer, maybe by swapping some space down here. So that's option number 2. So what that does is it takes this area right here from Ward 4 and takes it down to Ward 3. Now what essentially we have is now Ward 3 is a little bit heavy and Ward 4 is a little bit light. Which one, typically what we can't do is try to base our wards off of future growth, but in this scenario, that's one consideration when we're deciding between one or the other potentially. So what we have here, if we go back to this option 1, these boundaries stay exactly the same as they are now. And so everyone stays the same, Ward 4 stays the same, Ward 3 stays the same. What we know based upon future platting and future growth patterns, Ward 4 is gonna continue to grow faster than Ward 3. All of our wards are gonna see growth over the next 10 years. Ward 3, more than likely, is not gonna see as much growth as Ward 4. So if Ward 4 starts heavy, that means they're gonna be much heavier by the time we get to 2030. And Ward 3 may continue to lag behind and will be much lighter. So with this other option, it takes this, and again, you've got this really weird space right here, and we'll talk about that here in a second. That makes Ward 3 heavy and makes Ward 4 light. It's a little bit closer to our target population for both of them. And with what we think with future growth, Ward 4 is going to grow into their population number, and Ward 3 is going to start out a little bit ahead, which probably will keep them a little more balanced. Now again, we know Ward 2 is going to see growth, and they're going to have a lot of growth, and Ward 2 is going to be heavy, but there's not much that we can do about that based upon what we have to work with. So with the precincts, what the county did, they actually took this, there was a big precinct right here, and I think they tried to make them even between this here and this here. We don't have the precincts up on here, but to do that, they essentially just carved out this little thing right through this neighborhood here. So what it does, it allows us to get better population separation for us. The one complication is going to be it's going to be a little bit of a change for this neighborhood where we're literally going to split. It's Chisholm Lake neighborhood. We're going to split that neighborhood in half, which again is not a problem. We'll have to do a good job of educating these people. You're in Ward 3. I'm sorry, Ward 4. These people you're in Ward 3. So those are the two options for you all to consider and discuss. Again, if we wanted to make a change in other ways, then literally you make let's say we make a change here. Well, then that it affects everything, and it just becomes this large wheel. And our GIS department did a great job taking the data that they received, really working with it and worked through a lot of scenarios. And honestly, if we try to make as few changes as possible, these are the two options that we end up with. Otherwise, you end up greatly changing all of the wards and really making a lot of changes for people to maybe not be represented by the people that they were elected people not representing the people they were elected to represent. That's why we try to keep this as much as possible. So this scenario allows us to do that, and tonight it's really for you all to decide what you'd like to do, how you'd like to progress. As Mr. Murdoch said, if you choose one of these options and vote on adopting that, then we'll go into a 30-day period where we can receive public comment, and then you guys can come back and vote on putting it into ordinance at your second meeting in July. So I'm happy to answer any questions related to the process, or I'm also happy to just let you all discuss.
I know
So,
you're,
so let me be clear. Under no scenario could I possibly have Arcadia Lake.
No,
Is that what I'm hearing?
Hold on, let me go back and forth. No, we cannot. We cannot.
Okay, then
Not in
okay.
these scenarios, no.
Casey, I know you're this smart to do it by memory, but tell us some main roads.
Okay, so really when we're talking about changes here, again, this is where we're at now. So what happens when you move this line? It takes it over and it squares this up along Bryant. So you're talking these 2 square miles. Some of the neighborhoods you see in those, you're talking your Brookhavens, Timber Ridge, if you think in that part of town, Timberdale, those are the people that are kind of in this square mile, and then the square mile to the north of them as well. So again, if you go back historically, Ward 1 used to actually run right up and down Bryant. And so now we're actually back to that with Ward 1 running up and down Bryant. This really looks a lot more like a historic Ward 1. What we're talking about over here, when we're cutting, if we go here, this is off of Santa Fe, I believe, right here. Yeah, this is Santa Fe because the city limits don't go all the way to Western over here. So this is Santa Fe right here, and then this would jut up over. This is Edmond Road along here, is what you're looking at.
also during that, for Ward 3 and 4, they're on the same voting cycle.
They are correct. That's a good point. Thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Mayor. When we do elections here, Wards 3, whoops, I'm sorry, hit the wrong button. Wards 3 and 4 are at the same time. Wards 1 and 2 are at the same time. So for next year, for elections, Wards 1 and 2, those seats are open. So essentially what that means is if people were thinking about running for office, the only people that really would affect would be people in these 2 square miles that are going to go in both scenarios, go from Ward 2 to Ward 1.
And they still vote regardless.
They still vote,
Still
but
vote
yeah, if someone
regardless.
was considering running for a seat,
Running for a seat.
it would impact them, yes.
I know I was initially concerned because I thought that cutting through that neighborhood would be confusing for those folks there. But with the numbers, it's really going to put Ward 4 extremely heavy if we don't. And I know you have to cut through there so that you don't break up the precincts.
Correct, yeah, we're not allowed to do that. And what we do know with what's already been approved, and Randy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, when you get up in this area, there's quite a bit that's been approved, that's been platted, that we know is coming. Not as much in Ward 3. There's honestly just not as much open area to be developed within Ward 3 as there is within Ward 4.
So it'll balance out.
That's the hope.
Yeah, and so as much as I would like to keep that as simple as possible for voters, it just leaves that word so heavy.
It does, and I think whoever's a council member in 6 to 8 years will probably be very thankful if that's the route that you all choose to go. That they're even, or if you choose to go this way, then that's fine as well. The benefit to this is literally nothing changes over here, so nobody would have to worry about knowing anything different.
Yeah, just want to say to Casey, I mean, certainly these really truly are the 2 best options. Every time Stacy and I, since it affected ours, and we wanted to figure out a way to maybe not divide that neighborhood if we could, these are the 2 best options, and I think the population balance, in my mind, kind of trumps dividing a neighborhood. And the fact that they are on the same election cycle, it means you're still electing a city council member at the same time. So I just think knowing that we've got growth planned and approved in Ward 4 and not Ward 3, if we go with the other option that's already balanced, we're really gonna be out of whack in 8 years, so, 10 years. So I like 2. Option 2.
I like option 2 myself. But there is, just to remind everyone, what's going to happen is that we'll have a vote here on which option we like. And then the community will have 30 days, we'll go for public comment. You have 30 days for the community to also provide their comments. And then after that, the resolution will come back to us for incorporation. Very good. Any other questions, comments? Do we have a motion and a recommendation?
I move that we recommend option number 2 as presented by Casey Moore.
We have a motion
I'll second.
and a second. Please cast your vote. That has been passed for option 2.